Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. It's been 5 years since the Puttaswamy Judgement on privacy, and India's data protection bill, which came about as a result of this judgment, has been in the works for the past 4 years. Now, there's been a lot of pushback from some sections of society, such as privacy advocates and tech companies, and this bill was recently withdrawn from Parliament, citing the need for a more comprehensive review. Now, while we wait for a comprehensive data protection framework, we thought it would be a good idea to talk about measures that you can take to safeguard your privacy. So I am Bharath Reddy, and I have with me Bhavya Birla, who works as a research associate at the Dialogue. So Bhavya's area of interest cover information privacy, privacy regulation, data flows, and encryption, among other things. So welcome, Bhavya. Welcome to All Things Policy.
Thank you for having me on board, Bharath. It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah. So with that, let's get started. When you talk about privacy and convenience, they're seen as a trade-off, and generally, if you would like to your favorite app to make accurate recommendations based on your location, interests, your likes or whatever is on your mind right now, it's you need to compromise a little. I mean, some amount of data would be collected about you, and that data would be used to provide this, convenience that you see or accurate predictions that you can see. So, how do apps do this, and how do websites remember us and serve us these personalized ads? So, can we just look into that before we get into the other issues about how do we safeguard our privacy?
Sure. The manner in which websites and applications remember us is through a file that is called as a cookie. Cookies are essentially a string of alphanumeric numbers that are embedded in the browser that you use to access the website. Essentially, what a cookie does is that it gives a website the power of memorizing who you are as a visitor to that website. So, for instance, if I change a language on a page, and if I change the theme of that page, a cookie that is installed on my browser from that website will essentially remember these preferences that I've had or embedded into my personalization of that website. So cookies are integral pieces of software that allow a website to be as personalized as possible, ensuring that you are more likely to visit that website because that website is providing you something that is tailor-made for you. Now, the issue that arises with a website or an application remembering us in the case of cookies is the rise of something called as the third-party cookie. A third-party cookie is essentially a cookie that is from another website other than the one that you visited, that is also embedded into your browser, and something that tracks you after you've left that website. So what these cookies essentially allow the website and other parties in the internet ecosystem to do is to essentially track users and their behaviors online whenever they access any other website from that browser. So for instance, if I wish to, I access a website and then it installs a cookie on my browser. And then after closing that website, I go and look up shoes, for instance. The next time that I go to another website that has advertisements from the cookies that have already been installed on my website, on my browser, I will be shown advertisements for shoes. So essentially, cookies are the foundation for targeted advertising. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with targeted advertising. There have been multiple studies that talk about how users would like to see ads that are, something that they would like to be shown, ads that are more personalized to their interests and tastes. However, the issue that comes up, or the privacy intrusive nature of these cookies that come up, are on the flip side of this argument, that a cookie is essentially able to track your behaviors after you've left that particular website. So once they have formulated a profile of your behavior, they essentially can sell that profile to another data broker, which aggregates your activity from other cookies. Essentially, in the internet ecosystem, a data broker can ask multiple web pages to send data that their cookies have stored on you in order to maintain a profile of you as a person. So, for instance, if I've chosen shoes, like I had said before, on another website, and if I've gone to another website and said that black is my favorite color, for instance, the data broker is now able to understand my preferences in terms of color as well as in terms of the shoes that I like. So the data broker has enough data on me in order to sell it to a company that can offer me black shoes. So this is where the privacy intrusive nature of what cookies are come in. In light of the same, a lot of major browsers have implemented third-party cookie blocking measures. Like Brave, for instance, comes out of the box with third-party cookies being blocked. Safari does the same. But more popular browsers like Google Chrome maintain opt-out policy, essentially that you need to dig into their services or into their settings in order to turn off third-party cookies. So these are small aspects of the internet ecosystem that can become privacy intrusive in nature if we choose not to, act ourselves. Like for instance, whenever we visit a website, the one of the first prompts that we are given are a pop-up that talk about the cookies that that website would like to install on your browser. So the primary recommendation that we would like to give in this regard is that users should pay more attention to the cookie policy that that web page pops up. Essentially, that if it's a website that you would not like to be remembered by, we would recommend that you do not accept their cookies so that they cannot remember you or remember who you are as a user.
It's interesting that you mention Brave, right? So, as you might know, that Brave is an open source software, and generally, open source softwares tend to fare better on privacy. The code that is in that software is accessible to all, and you know how that software is going to use your data. And when with this openness also comes the these principles of data minimization and purpose limitation. So what data is collected about you will be limited to what is actually needed for that software to achieve its purpose, and it'll be used only for that purpose that it's collected, and not for serving you something else that it could be used for.
Yes. So, and open source softwares are also, as you said, they're open to more scrutiny. So, there is a group of developers, like for instance, on platforms such as GitHub, that look into open source softwares on a daily basis. Essentially, an application that is open source has its code online that developers can go through in order to ascertain whether they have privacy measures in place or not. If a website, for instance, that is open source and claims to be privacy respecting, that they do not either install cookies on your browser or collect any personal information from you, in an open source format, developers can essentially check if that is true by assessing their code. So that makes open source software essentially makes it easier for us to confirm that the website is doing what it says.
So going forward, so when we're talking about in the context, especially of the absence of a data protection framework, so what happens to our data when there are no laws to safeguard it? Can we speak a little bit about that?
Certainly. So, what essentially happens without a data protection bill in the place is that there are no delineation between what is permissible for a data fiduciary company to do and what is impermissible. Besides that, the fundamental right to privacy that was granted to us by the Puttaswamy judgment becomes a question, becomes moot essentially, because to enforce your right to privacy or the aspect of the right of privacy that you wish to engage, like for instance the right to be forgotten online, in which you essentially ask a browser to remove a search result that pops up when you input your name into the search engine. Things like these, in the absence of a data protection bill, what happens is that courts have had a varying degree of, they've had varied judgments. In For instance, the Gujarat High Court said that the right to be forgotten does not exist in India because there is no privacy law. But other courts, such as the courts of the Kerala High Court or Orissa High Court, have given litigants the right to be forgotten online, which even then, there are discrepancies between how they have approached. Like in India, particularly, when we compare the right to be forgotten, for instance, in India, as well as how it is being used in other jurisdictions, for instance, the European Union, we see that the right to be forgotten there talks about how that search result needs to be removed entirely. Whereas in the case of India, what happens is that we engage in something called as de-indexing or dereferencing, which essentially means that once I've filed for the right to be forgotten and the court agrees with my submissions, what essentially happens in India is that the search engine is asked by the government to remove the search results that pop up when somebody inputs my name. There have been multiple cases where people have, engaged the right to be forgotten in India and have had varied results in enforcing that particular right. In light of the same, it is important that a data protection bill is passed as soon as possible because it essentially formulates the legal basis that you have, or it concretizes your fundamental right to privacy, essentially.
That's right. And I think from what people are saying, it might be another year before another bill is proposed, and there's a debate around that, and it actually becomes an act, and we have some proper framework in place. So
Like, we understand that the delay in passing that bill is something that is causing anxiety to people who are, or people that value their privacy a lot. But we also believe that the time that they have taken up until now, another year or any other period of time that you take from here on, can allow the government to make a comprehensive bill, essentially a bill that hits the ground running. So while the delay is something that is regrettable, we believe that it's another opportunity for the government to hold more public consultations, to understand the industry that they wish to regulate a little bit more than they already have, and to present a bill that is going to be comprehensive and will hit the ground running.
thanks, Bhavya. So before we get into the other questions about how our digital intelligences use data and how do we protect our privacy and all of that, we'll just take a short break and we'll be back. So welcome back. So we have with us Bhavya Birla, who's speaking with us about privacy and what we can do to safeguard it. So Bhavya, can you speak a little bit about how our digital intelligences use the data that they collect, and why do they need to collect that data, and how do they safeguard it? What are their incentives, things like that?
Certainly. So, like as we've talked about, there is a lack of data protection bill in India, and there are no obligations per se besides the SPDI rules and the IT Act in India on data fiduciaries or any other companies that collect our data or process it. In the absence of the same, becomes a responsibility of us as informed citizens to ensure that we are practicing privacy tools or we are practicing a cyber hygiene online. What this essentially means is that whenever we do visit a website, that we pay attention to their cookie policy, which is essentially the first pop-up that you go to any website now, because it is mandated by law. The website will prompt you about their cookie policy, and then you can choose to reject the cookies if you do not wish to be remembered by the website that you visited. Choices like these are very rudimentary in nature. Like when we talk about our experiences or our collective experiences online, we see that a lot of people do not pay attention to the terms that they agree to, or the cookie policy that they agree to. These are habits that the industry has become accustomed to. So now what they essentially do, if there is a malified intention on the side of a company, what they can essentially do is that they can make a policy that essentially takes all the data that you give that particular website and sell it to another person. So in the absence of a data protection bill, there is no obligation on these data fiduciaries besides the Act and the SPDI rules. Another prong of the same point is that we need to understand the data that the particular app that we are using will require. Like for instance, if your calculator is asking you your location data, you can realize that there is a modified intention of the application asking you that, because the calculator does not need your location data. So it is making those small, making those habits in order to see what data an application is collecting, as well as assessing whether that data collection process is integral to that application performing well or performing the purpose for which you had installed it. So that is one prong. Another prong to this particular point is also understanding the extension files or understanding what we download online. For instance, when we download images from Google Images, or when we download images from another website that has a repository of images, we expect the file that we've downloaded to be an image format that can be a JPEG, a PNG, or other formats of images. But in case where we have clearly downloaded an image and then the file format that we have downloaded is an .exe file, we can understand that it was an application that that has been installed under malifiedly, or it has been added on to the image that we had downloaded. So we can understand that the website had a malified intention and that we should not visit that website again. These are habits that need to be taken or given more importance at like an individual level up until a data protection bill is passed, because our informational privacy, our understanding or our use of the internet, if we wish for the same to be something that is privacy respecting, we need to understand that the data that we voluntarily give and the data that we involuntarily give to the website, both can be aggregated later on. We can also dive a little bit deeper on what the data broker aspect of data collection is. Data brokers are essentially companies that collect your data from different sources, like for instance the websites that you visited or other websites that you visited. Like they use cookies in order to aggregate the data, in order to maintain or make an image of who you are as a person. in order to serve you ads better. In the current framework, these data brokers are not properly regulated or effectively regulated, rather, and they allow for companies to make a profile of you, which in certain cases can be used against your will or can be used in order to profile you, in order to surveil you, or in order to, intrude into your personal space.
Right. So when we're looking at this, so what are generally the common threats to a user's privacy online, and how do you think that users can be more aware of it and take actions to safeguard it?
Certainly. The first piece of recommendations that we would like to offer is essentially to ask yourself the question whether parting with your personal data in any given situation is worthwhile or if it's prudent in that case. Like, for instance, when you go to a coffee shop or if you go to any other restaurant and they ask you for your number, it is not required of you to give your number because, in the case of the current regulatory regime, the SPDI rules that come under the IT Act do not really cover physical or like external data collection practices. Like, for instance, if a surveyor comes up to you and then randomly asks you for your personal information, I believe asking yourself the question whether it is prudent to give him that information is the first step of safeguarding your privacy online as well as offline, because there are no rules over data collection or data processing in the physical realm, even if they are a little bit on the online side of things. So we should make that decision of asking ourselves that questions primarily. Secondly, we need to understand what we do online. Like, for instance, when we share images with our friends over WhatsApp, or we share images over the internet on any other social media website, for instance, what we do not really realize in most cases is that the image that we have sent has metadata of its own. Now, this becomes integral to your privacy because the metadata that image that you have shared with another person also has personal information like your exact location of that image, wherever you took that image. It gives the user the phone that you're using or the general vicinity in which you reside. So these are small habits that all of us indulge in on a daily basis. Of course, everybody uses social media apps to share images and share other links with each other or share their locations with one another. These are habits that have become integral to our understanding of what communication means, because digital platforms have become what communication is entirely. Like, we none of us text each other anymore, or most of the newer generation that has come along does not wish to call one another, so they indulge in communication solely through these social media websites. In such a scenario, it becomes extremely prudent for us to realize the information that we are willingly giving away to another person, to another platform, and we need to take steps in order to ascertain whether we are comfortable with parting away with such privacy. Another aspect of this is that we need to would like highly recommend using password managers. Password managers are essentially encrypted websites that create extremely hard passwords to crack, like alphanumeric random numbers that you can input into a website, and then the password manager essentially remembers the passwords for you. So you have a singular password to remember. Other habits that we would recommend would include two-factor authentication, which is essentially that your phone and your laptop are connected, and if you lose any of those devices and anybody tries to access your device, you are notified, and the data that is on your device that was stolen can be safeguarded or erased entirely. So in case where your devices are physically stolen, you can have the peace of mind that that person will not be able to access your personal information at least, and you can indulge in filing an FIR or trying to get your device back. But the point that we're trying to make from this particular aspect is that we need to indulge in behaviors and we need to question ourselves in terms of understanding whether parting away with our personal information is prudent in any situation or not. That is the first and the primary step one needs to take in order to maintain their privacy online as well as offline.
Thanks, Bhavya. These seem like, basic things that everybody should do to safeguard their privacy. So if we'd like to, for our listeners, if they would like to find out more about how they can protect their privacy and improve their cyber hygiene, could you point us to some resources where we could find out more?
Certainly. The resources that I would like to recommend, firstly, would include a website called as Privacy Guides. Privacy Guides is essentially a repository which gives you alternatives to the apps that you're currently using. So, for instance, in the case you're using an instant messenger such as WhatsApp, the repository will recommend using applications such as Signal or Threema, which are essentially end-to-end encrypted, just like WhatsApp, but also maintain more security measures or essentially give you a better, more private experience. The second repository that I would like to recommend is called as Terms of Service Did Not Read, which is an excellent website for us to, it is an eye-opening website for people to visit, because majority of times, like I've already said, people do not pay attention to the terms of service that they agree when they, install a application, or if they install a program on their laptop. So this website essentially grades terms of service that very popular websites have, and it gives them, and it presents in brief the privacy intrusive nature of these websites. The third one, which is another resource that I would like to highly recommend, is called Have I Been Pwned? Have I Been Pwned is essentially a repository that allows you to input your email address into a search bar, which will show you if your email address was leaked in a data leak. It will point you towards the specific data leaks, like it will show you the application from which the data leak took place, and it will also give you like a general date when it was leaked. It is actually eye-opening when you input your email address into repositories such as this and understand how much of your data has been, lost to leaks or has been sold online. And the last resource that I would like to offer for our listeners is essentially called as the Data Detox Kit, which is a repository which has tutorials for normal individuals and the practices that they should indulge in, or the privacy settings that they should turn off and on their applications. Like, for instance, after the Cambridge Analytica scam or the Cambridge Analytica incident, a lot of these websites came up with a lot of privacy features. Like Google has privacy features that allow you to essentially depersonalize ads, or ensure that your location isn't tracked always by default. So Data Detox Kit is a extremely crucial resource that can allow users to implement privacy respecting or privacy hygiene practices into their daily lives.
Thanks, Bhavya. So while we wait for a data protection framework, I guess there might be some companies which might proactively be taking measures to safeguard our user data and privacy. But there will be and these might be some of the bigger companies who have a lot of scrutiny on them. But there'll be a longer tail of smaller companies and medium-sized companies which might not have the same priorities and which might not be subject to the same level of scrutiny by the public, right? And so it's important that we raise awareness about privacy and the measures that we can do to safeguard it. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a really interesting one. And looking forward to more conversations with you.
Certainly. Thank you so much for having us on board. I hope we provided the necessary details for our listeners to implement a privacy hygiene into their own lives. We understand that privacy is something that is integral to people, and growingly so, that we've seen that people nowadays have a good understanding of what their privacy is, as well as they have an intention to act on it. Everybody understands that the websites that we used or our activity online is being tracked, and users are more inclined these days to implement a privacy hygiene. I hope we were able to give you resources as well as answer some questions that a lot of users have, and this has been lovely. Thank you for having us on board.
Thanks, Bhavya.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.